Hello, everybody. Welcome to our ADA webinar. Thank you so much for attending and for being here today. We are going to be covering the Americans with Disabilities Act and its requirements, and hopefully making it as digestible as possible, as this is always the just the easiest to understand requirements that have ever been shared. Keep in mind as I move through the presentation that the requirements that I'm about to cover with you apply a lot more than to a lot more than just drinking fountains, okay? Also consider that all of you have your own state and local laws to adhere to, so ensure that those are taken into consideration as well. State and local standards might have to be more strict than what is currently in place at the federal level, which is what we're covering today, the federal standard for compliance. Okay. My name is Justin Dunn. I am a senior field marketing specialist here at Haas. Been here about 9 years, specializing in ADA and ANSI for most of that time, and I'm very happy to be here and be presenting this information to you. With me, I'll have him introduce himself, is my partner in crime.
Thank you, Justin. Hello, everyone. My name is Hayden Delgado. I'm a field marketing specialist with Haas.
And then also with us, just in the background, moderating the webinar, making sure everything runs smoothly, and is also going to pop on every once in a while and handle our poll questions, is Alex McCombs. So those questions, if you have any for us at any time during the webinar, make sure to post them using the control panel there on your screen. Any questions that are not addressed during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar will be answered in the follow-up materials that we'll send you after the webinar. And I'll explain that here in just a second. The poll questions that I just mentioned that Alex is going to run, there are 5 total. She's going to pop on, ask a quick question, have you please interact with these poll questions. They really do help us out as far as understanding your needs, continuing to improve this for you and future listeners. So they'll be launched throughout the presentation. They're spread out really well, and your participation is really greatly appreciated in those. Back to those follow-up materials, we'll be sending an email to you that'll have the on-demand recording, the presentation slides, additional support materials, instructions for how to get CEU credits if you're looking for them. If you are, we have them available, and we will share instructions on how to capitalize on those. The Q&A, the questions and the answers, all of that will go out about 24 to 48 hours after the presentation. We just need time to compile those questions, the answers, and the materials. So moving on from there, again, be sure to ask questions if you have them. Now, really quickly for the history lesson portion of the webinar, a bit about us, and after the agenda, that'll come up next, a little bit of info on the ADA and its origins. But for now, our founder, Luther Haas, there on the screen on the bottom left, invented the world's first sanitary drinking fountain bubbler. And back in 1906, amidst the ban the cup movements, and formed the Haas Sanitary Drinking Fountain Company in 1909 in Berkeley, California. Back when germ theory was still fresh and new on our minds, and nobody understood it, and everybody thought it was fake, and this gentleman was ahead of his time thinking about public safety. Okay. Luther was working as a sanitation inspector for Berkeley, California, when he had the thought to invent a device that would prevent users from spreading germs and disease through public hydration. Okay, and that device was that drinking fountain bubbler here. You see, pre-Luther and his invention, it was very commonplace to see public fountains with constant running water, which would pick up, you'd pick up a cup, you'd have yourself a drink, then you drop the cup, and the next person would come along and use that cup, and that is super duper gross. And this had obvious public sanitation issues. Some of the common diseases being spread included cholera, typhoid fever, dysentery, all of which potentially fatal and spread from mouth to cup to mouth. And lucky for us, Luther put his inventive mind to the task and he found a solution that has continued to benefit public health and safety to this day. So, and a fun fact, his first prototype was actually his bedpost that he disassembled and turned into a bubbler head. Our agenda: overview of the legislation for drinking fountains, common ADA installation issues, ADA compliant drinking fountain and bottle filler installations, hygienic hydration solutions, and then we'll end with the ADA Q&A. Okay, now with that in mind, I'm going to cover the beginning of the webinar here. Hayden is going to take over and give a lot of the examples in the core of the webinar, and then we'll handle the Q&A together a little bit later. Now, first and foremost about the ADA, it's important to remember that this is civil rights legislation. Okay, prior to the standard and its inception, accessibility was up to the business, the individual, and was infrequently available to people that didn't want to spend money to update and thought that your handicap was your problem. Okay, there were no teeth in any of the requirements to provide access to buildings and grounds for an entire class of people that were being very heavily neglected. Okay, but thanks to people like Justin Dart, founder of Dart Industries and responsible for such brands as Duracell, Tupperware, and so on, he was one of the biggest advocates for the movement and is often referred to as the grandfather of the ADA, as he himself was in fact disabled. Alongside fellow advocates and Mr. George H.W. Bush, who was the sitting president that signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law on July 26, 1990. And this new act granted reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities and prohibited discrimination based on their disabilities. It's a very cool story, and it would be hard to believe now, but they were met with incredibly strong resistance to these proposed changes. Okay. Now, there were protests. There were counter protests. They had demonstrations like the Capitol Crawl, where about 60 plus demonstrators, they abandoned their wheelchairs, crawled up the steps of the Capitol to show its inaccessibility. And once they reached the top, demanded to meet with the Speaker of the House to discuss further plans. In another instance, while protesting the Transportation Association, and this is one of my favorite stories, the police actually showed up to arrest the protesters, but in a very funny and very ironic twist that only helped their cause. They didn't have accessible paddy wagons and had to obtain accessible school buses to transport them into custody. So the Public Transit Authority was one of the groups that fought hardest actually against regulations for accessibility and really ended up slowing down the process a bit through lobbying efforts, which led to the aforementioned Capitol Crawl, which was in response to that bill getting stuck without a signature that you see here. Justin Dart there on the right. So lastly, with that fresh ink needed, this photo is HW signing the bill into law alongside Justin Dart, and he even added a nice note to the famous photo thanking Mr. Dart for his efforts. Okay, so we're going to get into the meat of this presentation, but right after Alex launches poll question number 1, please.
Hi everyone, welcome to your first poll question. The first poll question today is, what are you looking to obtain from this webinar? A, basic ADA compliance guidance, B, product recommendations, C, COVID/hygienic solutions and best practices, or D, CEU credits. We greatly appreciate your participation in this. I'll give you around 30 to 45 seconds to answer. Awesome. Thank you everyone that has submitted their answers. I'm going to go ahead and close this first poll question. Back to you, Justin.
Okay, and again, thank you very much for participating, and that really helps us out. Let's get into it. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, 28 CFR Part 36, Title 3, regarding public accommodations, commercial facilities, and its requirements are enforced by none other than the Department of Justice. Title 3 is going to be our entire focus today. The following are the key sections of the standard pertaining to drinking fountains and their compliance. Also, remember, we are going to send these slides out to everyone after the presentation so you can reference them later. And quickly, since I always get asked, Title II covers state and local government. Title I has more to do with anti-discrimination of disabled employees. So I want to kick this off by talking about section 36.403, which gives us a list of priorities when making alterations to provide accessible facilities. And you're going to notice that in this list, drinking fountains take a very high priority, even over accessible parking. The entrance, route, restrooms, public telephones, fountains, as well as parking, storage, and alarms are all high priority items and basic human necessities when navigating the world. All walks of life, all people everywhere need water, right? It's right at the top of the list of things we need to survive, and we need to ensure that it's accessible to everyone. Now, Chapter 1, Section 102 just lets us know that this document contains both adult and children's height requirements based on average human anthropometrics, or measurements and capabilities of the human body. Children are defined as age 12 or younger in the ADA. Chapter 2 explains that where there is one fountain, typically a high side fountain, that there must be 2 fountains. Local building code determines that the number of drinking fountains that must be installed based on occupancy. This simply states that there must be a high side and a low side fountain. What most people don't understand is that the low side fountain is not the only one that's designed for people with disabilities. Okay, the high side fountain is also a disabled, accessible fountain designed for those with bending or stooping disabilities that may be using a walker, cane, crutches, and may not be physically able to utilize the low side fountain. Other than aesthetics, drinking fountains are not designed for able-bodied people. It's reasonable to assume that you, if you are able-bodied, that you can take a drink of whichever fountain you choose. So if you are installing a single fountain in your facility or in a park, you must satisfy this requirement and install a second fountain. They don't even need to be next to each other. They can be separated on either end of a hallway, but they both must be present and easily accessible. Now, 211.3 is referred to as our 50-50 rule. I like that. It's easier to remember that way. And it simply states that half of the units installed need to be high fountains and the other half need to be low fountains. So for example, if you're installing 6 brand new Haas drinking fountains in your building, you couldn't do 4 high fountains and only 2 low fountains, okay? You'd have to provide an even number of both, 3 and 3. The exception to this rule is where the number of fountains yields a fraction, okay? And another example, given the previous requirement, we will assume that you've met the minimum number of drinking fountains for the property and have decided to add an additional drinking fountain, giving you 7 total fountains with only 6 required in your building. The 7th fountain can either be high or low. It's entirely up to you. So long as you have 3 high, 3 low, you've met the 50-50 rule, you can do whatever you want with the last fountain, okay? In chapter 3, we start getting into dimensional and mechanical elements. Now you're gonna hear me use that term a lot, and Hayden used that term a lot throughout the presentation. An element can be any of the devices that we are granting access to. This can be a drinking fountain, phone, fire extinguisher, baby changing table, etc. Many of the measurements that we are about to cover are applied to obviously a lot more than just drinking fountains. This is one of the most important measurements and the easiest ones to remember, and very frequently the section that's being violated in tear out and reinstalls. 305.3 and 305.5, size and position respectively, detail clear ground space to accommodate the wheelchair underneath the fountain, okay? Allowing an approach that's unobstructed to the fountain. You have to provide a 30-inch by 48-inch space of clearance underneath the element, which is just larger than your typical adult-sized wheelchair, giving the user clear space for the wheelchair and for their hands to maneuver the wheelchair inside of that space, okay? Because often they're in alcoves, and we'll talk about that. Now, here's an example that really clearly shows clear ground space in front of an element. Okay, in this case, you've got a telephone and a fire extinguisher. 305.5 explains the positioning of this clear ground space, allowing for either a forward approach like the one you see on the left, or a parallel approach like the one you see on the right-hand side there. Now remember that all of these measurements are minimum requirements. Okay, the more space you can provide, the better. When the element is in an alcove, like in the examples above, the wheelchair users are going to need additional space to maneuver. And the clear floor space changes based on both the depth of the alcove and the type of the approach. So in our first example, our 30 by 48 inches becomes 36 by 48 inches when the depth of the alcove exceeds 2 feet, 24 inches. And in the second example, for a parallel approach, when the depth of the alcove exceeds 15 inches, then our clear floor space must be 30 by 60 inches, okay? More and more states are requiring the use of alcoves, and it just makes sense for these elements to be out of the path of travel and you to have a more safe and intimate place to go just grab a drink and utilize public accommodation. Now, extending up from the clear ground space that we have defined is our toe and knee clearance. So try to think of this clear area as a 3-dimensional space. Our toe clearance is 9 inches from the ground to the bottom of the element, and our knee clearance is 27 inches from the ground up. Obstructions in the yellow highlighted area are another, unfortunately, common compliance issue. I've got some great examples coming up that we've found out in the wild. The space underneath has to be clear, and that includes any space between the victim's knees. So think like P-traps, hanging phone books, anything else that you might be able to think of, but this space is entirely unusable, okay? Which brings us to poll question number 2. Alex, if you would, please.
Alrighty, our second poll question is, how likely are you to purchase, retrofit, specified touchless hydration products post-pandemic? A, extremely likely, B, very likely, C, somewhat likely, D, not at all likely. Again, I will give everyone roughly 30 to 45 seconds to put in your selections. Again, we appreciate everyone putting in their selections. They're very helpful. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. Thank you, everyone.
All right, moving on. So 307 is where we're at. This is protruding objects, and it is primarily in place to protect another type of protected class that we haven't really touched on yet. So, and that class is the vision impaired. Elements, whatever it may be, drinking fountain, may only protrude into a walkway so much and have to be located at certain heights, whether they're in an alcove or not. Okay, it doesn't matter. So this is to prevent anyone from running into those elements, objects with their leading edge or the lowest point on the front of the element above 27 inches can only protrude a maximum of 4 inches into the path of travel. But so long as that leading edge of the element is at or under 27 inches, then this is considered to be detectable by detection cane, according to the Department of Justice. Now, this is one of my favorite examples. We've got our seeing impaired Tom Cruise looking guy here navigating a hallway. On the bottom right-hand side, we see an object very similar to a drinking fountain. And so long as its leading edge is at or below that 27-inch line, it can be detected through the use of that detection cane and early enough to be avoided and prevent potential injury. Okay, this fountain and any element, so long as it is meeting the 27-inch requirement, can protrude any amount into the space. Okay, the same rule applies for elements at or above 80 inches from the floor. This is considered headroom clearance, and similar to the previous example, can extend any amount into the space. Okay, on the left, we have an object sitting above 27 inches and below 80 inches, and therefore may not protrude into the space any more than 4 inches, with one exception, and that exception is a handrail, which are allowed to protrude 4.5 inches as an included exception in the standard. Now I'm going to use our 1011 HPS and our SK3 cane skirt for the next example. That's what you see here on the screen. This is a dual high-low unit, typically installed in, you know, your high traffic like customer areas, lobbies, etc., because it's shiny. And it's a great example of what your typical like high-low ADA installation looks like. Okay, now the SK3 cane skirt is what we need to discuss here, where drinking fountains cannot be alcoved out of the path of travel, or the state doesn't require it. A cane skirt, which is what the SK3 is, must be used to lower that leading edge of the high side fountain to 27 inches to also make that side detectable. Okay, when using a detection cane, if unassisted, you are generally following what is referred to as a shoreline or the outermost edge of a space. Okay, since a visually impaired may need to detect something on either side of the room, they may be traveling in either direction, and without the cane skirt in place, there will likely be incidents where people will run into the high side fountain because that leading edge is not at 27 inches, and they'll have to a difficult time finding it or detecting it without the skirt in place, which is why we use it. So many states, again, don't fully utilize alcoves, and until they do, cane skirts are the answer to this issue, and they have to be in place. Okay. Now next, section 308, this covers our reach ranges, right? We're sitting in a wheelchair, we need to know reasonably how far up, how far down we can reach, and with what objects in place. Okay, another important requirement when something like a bottle filler is installed, or when things like baby changing tables are put in place. Now, the slide is really straightforward. If your reach is unobstructed, like in the photo on the left, then you have a 48-inch max, 15-inch minimum reach range. Okay, unobstructed. Any buttons, handles, sensors, and so on have to be located within this range. But as soon as we introduce an obstruction, our reach ranges are diminished. When an object is shorter than 20 inches in place, we keep our 48-inch high reach range, but our lower reach range disappears, since we now have the fountain or similar element put in place. Now, when reaching over an object that is 20 to 25 inches, our high reach range is shortened to only 44 inches. Makes sense? Generally speaking, drinking fountains are shorter than 20 inches, so the middle example will be what our reach ranges are going to be, usually. Remember, we want to make things as easy as possible and not create a challenge for the person trying to access this equipment in public, okay? Now, the DOJ advisory defines reach ranges for children based on age, okay? Remember, children are defined as ages 12 and under in the ADA. These are all ranges that apply to both forward and parallel approach to an element. Now, starting on the left, obviously as the grow, their arm reach grows as well. Kids grow like weeds, and of all different sizes. So as they grow, their reach extends, right? So it changes. Ages over 12 are expected to utilize adult height drinking fountains, okay? The only places you'll typically find children's fountains in use is in the school system, daycare facilities, and similar facilities where many children are supervised by fewer adults, okay? In public, the expectation is that an adult is present to assist children with utilizing a fountain or other elements they may need access to. In Chapter 6, we get into the specifics regarding public plumbing elements and their measurements. First off, 602.2 covers clear floor space and the necessity to have that clear floor space centered on the unit, not on the alcove, okay? This is for a forward approach, as a parallel approach needs to be set up differently. Obviously, our toe and knee clearance must also still be available. There is an exception included here for parallel approaches to children's units, allowing a parallel approach so long as the bubbler or spout is at a certain height and depth. Okay, knee and toe clearance begins to diminish pretty quickly as we lower fountains for children's use. So the use of a parallel approach is a very important option to have, especially considering that children's wheelchairs are sometimes adult wheelchairs or the wrong size. Custom size wheelchairs can be expensive if you don't have the right access to funds, and they can be pretty quickly outgrown. So a parallel approach can really help to solve this issue a bit. Now, this is a really good example of or illustration of that floor space and how they need to be centered on the elements themselves. As far as the fountain goes, since the clear floor space is intended for the wheelchair user, it's centered on the left low side. And since there's no real floor space defined in black and white for the high side, the floor space can spill over under that side fountain as much as is needed, okay? Many make the mistake of centering that clear floor space on the alcove, which is a huge mistake and ends up leading to expensive tear outs and redesigns of the alcove and of the space. Now this one takes a little bit of explaining, but here you can see we have a total width of 48 inches in this alcove, wall to wall. It's not deeper than 24 inches, so we don't need to expand our 30 by 48 inch clear floor space. You will notice that it shows a separate measurement for California. California has gone above and beyond the standard requirements and mandates an additional 2 inches of floor space, bumping up the total width of the floor space to 32 inches standard, okay? So long as the state requirements go above and beyond the federal ones, they can supersede them. Now, centering on the fountain is not mandatory, by the way, but does make the installation more aesthetically pleasing. Of course, putting the fountains dead center in that space. If the alcove was deeper than 24 inches, remember that we would need a total of 36 inches of ground clearance to allow for more maneuverability on a forward approach. For California, we have our 32 inches and 30 inches everywhere else for the low side. Now, center line to center line, these fountains are separated by 16 inches, which means we need an additional 16 inches of space on either side of the fountain total to meet our 32-inch minimum for California and 15 inches for our typical 30 inches. And that's really this kind of sums that up in that space and how it's designed, the depth, the width of the fountains, and make sure that you're centering that clear floor space, but in a way that you can accommodate that 32 or 30 inches centered on the fountain itself. And that brings us to poll question number 3.
Alrighty, poll question number 3 is, has your facility updated hydration options due to COVID? No change. We've deactivated all drinking fountain bubblers. We've added touchless features to all fountains, or we've added bottle filling stations. Please select the option that best applies. We super appreciate it. I'll give you all a few more seconds to input your responses. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and close this third poll question. Thank you, everyone, and back to you, Justin.
Thank you, Alex. And actually, Hayden is going to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, guys. So here we have an excerpt from the California Building Code, and this excerpt made it mandatory to locate all drinking fountains in an alcove or with wing walls for the state of California. This is in order to make sure that drinking fountains are not protruding into any pedestrian walkways or paths of travel. And there has been a few other states that have done this as well now. Texas, Connecticut, even Georgia, as well as a few others. And these alcoves or areas with this space need to be at least 32 inches wide by 18 inches deep at a very minimum. And where an alcove cannot be put in place, you can add wing walls to act as an alcove. And again, those would need to project out horizontally at least as far as the drinking fountain and to within 6 inches from the floor in order to be detected in plenty of time. And it seems like it's not allowing me to advance the slides. Justin, if you wouldn't mind doing that. There we go. So here we have a interesting example. This is, as Justin said earlier, a drinking fountain that we found out in the wild. And the problem here is pretty obvious. We have our low side fountain installed on the right there, and directly under it, cutting into our toe and knee clearance, is a gas line. So in order to make this example compliant, we would need to do a tear out and a redesign, which is going to be costly. And we would want to flip the height of these two fountains, putting our high side fountain above that gas line because we don't need our toe and knee clearance under it, and putting our low side on the far left, as long as that pipe on that left wall of the alcove is not cutting into our 30 inches of clear floor space. Going back to section 602.2, we talked about children's use, and it gave us a maximum bubbler height of 30 inches, and that is for the spout where the water is actually coming out of, not the top of the bubbler head. And then 3.5 inches from the front edge of the drinking fountain to where that bubbler is located as well, just for a easily amount of accessible space for any children using the unit. And many state and local building authorities, as we said, do not allow for parallel approach. So you should check with your local codes for this. And some even specify their own knee and toe clearance. It's all based on local codes for child height. Here we have an example of another pour installation. In this example, the biggest problem is that our low side left unit is installed just way too close to the wall. We would need to move that off of the wall or switch the heights of these fountains so that we have enough clear floor space for a wheelchair to access that low unit on the left there. And then we also have our bottle filler just at too high of a height. We need that to be at 48 inches max. As you can see here, it is just above that. And we also need our bottle filler above the low side unit, which we'll get into those requirements a little bit later on in this. So one way that we could make this compliant is either tearing out that high-low on the left because the high-low on the right is meeting our ADA accessibility requirements, or we could take that high-low on the left, switch the heights, put the low side more in the center so that we have a good amount of space to easily access that unit. Here we have another pour installation issue. We have a cascading design. This is very common. It's very pleasing on the eye. So we see this all over the place, especially in alcoves. The problem here is these fountains were just installed a little bit out of order. So because of that, we need to rearrange them and put them in an order where everything is easily accessible. And one way that we can do that is taking our high-low, which is meant to be installed at wheelchair height and at standing person's height, but currently it's installed at a child's height, which is incorrectly for that wheelchair accessible unit on the far left-hand side. We would need to take this and install it at the proper height and on the right if we wanted to keep that cascading design. So we have the right amount of clear floor space under that wheelchair accessible unit. Then we would want to take our standalone unit and install that on the far left-hand side in order to put that at a child's height and far enough away from that high-low unit. Again, just making sure that we have that 30 inches of clear floor space. So in order to show a correct way of doing that last example, I'm going to use the Haas 1311 standalone cast iron fountain, very common in schools because of that cast iron material not absorbing the heat or as much sunlight, so children can rest on it when they're using it. And then also our 1501, which is that cast iron but in a dual fountain. And in order to keep that cascading design as shown here, we have that standalone fountain installed on the right-hand side. Our bubbler is below that max height, and we have 22 inches from the center of that wheelchair accessible unit in the middle to the center of the child height fountain. That 22 inches gives us plenty of room for a wheelchair under the unit because it gives us 15 inches from the center of that unit to the front leading edge of the child height unit, giving us 30 inches centered under it. Again, if we are in California installing these, we would need to add another inch to that to make it 32 inches centered under this unit and give us plenty of space. That high side is above the wheelchair unit, so it's not offering any obstruction in this example, and we can have our space going under that unit as well. Here we have a 3300 FR. That's a Haas outdoor fountain, very common. You've likely seen these in several parks. But the problem with this one is it's just installed too close to the wall. This takes away that front approach that we need for a wheelchair, because any wheelchair that's coming up to this unit trying to access it is going to be sliding up against the wall, and it's not going to be easy enough for them to access water from the approach that is necessary for where this bubbler head is at. Another outdoor compliance example that we have is our 3150. So we're going to go through using this as an example and show how it can be installed in different places to be compliant. And this model can be adjusted as either an adult height or a child height ADA fountain. In this case, we're going to probably be using it in playgrounds or in different applications in the outdoors. And it's a very common style. Most that have this type of style have approaches from different sides. So when we're installing it, we need to make sure to consider the approach and the direction of the approach for the bubbler head, as we kind of saw in that last example. So if the pedestal fountain is positioned against the wall, as seen here, we need the center line of that wheelchair fountain's bowl to be located at least 15 inches from the wall. That gives us our 30 inches centered under the unit for the width of clear floor space. Then we also need that 48 inches of length as shown in the image. And then we also have the visual for that high side standing approach. Justin kind of talked about this earlier. It's a generally accepted amount of sufficient space for a person with standing or stooping disabilities to be able to easily access drinking water. It's really necessary for anybody that may need a walker, just so that we're providing them enough clear space in front of the unit to get up to it. And sometimes we see trash cans or other elements put in these places, and we don't want anything obstructing their access as well. It's also common practice for public parks to lay down concrete pads. This helps remove the fountain from any walkways, but it also provides a firm surface, not only to stand on, but also for anybody in a wheelchair to just avoid the difficulties of maneuvering a wheelchair on something that's a little bit looser like dirt or grass. And in this case, we do have our path of travel on the left-hand side of that lower fountain. And in order to fit the clear floor space for both of these units, we have a hardscope pad put down of at least 69 inches by 52 inches wide with that low side facing the path of travel. Again, that is for easy forward approach to that unit. Similar example here, but now we're going to go ahead and add wing walls. So we talked about this earlier with California, and this is a great example. All requirements remain the same for the approach, still favoring that forward approach there. And we have guardrails extending out at least as far as the furthest point of the drinking fountain to make sure that that unit is detectable by anybody walking by. And that gives us a length of 39 inches by 54 inches in order to keep that clear floor space for both units and keep them far enough away from any walls or the guardrails. And then just really quick, we have a nice lineup here of the Haas outdoor models. There's several different ways and styles to meet the ADA accessibility. So we provide different options in different materials or freeze resistant, whatever you need to meet the requirements and the codes that you have for your specific location as well. And then going back to legislation a little bit. So the 2010 ADA standards for accessible design do come from the ANSI standard. And in 2017, a revised revision was made to this standard, and it's called the A117.1-2017. One of those updates that it included was the addition of bottle filling stations to the section 602 on drinking fountains. And as I said, this is an addition. So a bottle filling station cannot replace a drinking fountain. You can have as many bottle fillers as you would like. You can add as many as you would like, but they do not replace a drinking fountain. And if you have more drinking fountains than what's required by your local codes, then you can replace one with a bottle filler so long as you're still meeting those minimum requirements. The bottle fillers must also adhere to the 30 by 48 inches of clear floor space that's located directly under the unit, centered on that unit, and it must be front approach for any bottle filler that's located on that wheelchair accessible drinking fountain. Controls also have to be hand operated or automatic for these. And then if you have a standalone bottle filler, it can have front approach or parallel approach, but only front approach when it's located above a drinking fountain. So for a few examples of these, I'm going to use our 1920 series. These make ADA compliance or even just upgrades to ADA compliance very easy. These can be retrofitted over a large number of units that are already in place out there, or they can come with a unit. And there's several different styles. We have push buttons, touchless, stainless steel, wide enamel, so we can put these over our units and make them ADA accessible. Here we have a 1117 LNH02. This is a touchless high-low drinking fountain with the touchless 1920 above it. It's very accessible to everyone. It's well within our reach ranges, but we do always need to ensure that those buttons on the touchless sensor are within our reach range whenever we're installing these, and that activator is either hand operated or automatic. As I said, this is touchless, so this one would be automatic. And then we also have our first picture of the bottle rest. It's a great addition to these drinking fountains. It allows someone to put down the bottle and activate with just one hand, which really helps another type of class that we haven't talked about yet, which is those with prosthetic limbs, or even just somebody who needs to maneuver a wheelchair. It's a little bit easier to keep a wheelchair steady by keeping one hand on it. So if they can fill up a bottle with just one hand, it gives them a little bit more stability. And then as I talked about, we need to ensure that that button or touchless sensor is reachable. So here we have one installed at 46 inches for that activation. That is below our 48 inches of max height for a drinking fountain that's not sticking out more than 20 inches. If you do have an element that's more in that 20 to 25 inches of protrusion off the wall, we would need to lower that bottle filler down to at least 44 inches. And then we have one of my favorite pictures. This is a very common compliance issue that we see. It is correct in the fact that the bottle filler is installed above the low side unit. But the problem is our activation for this bottle filler is way over our 48 inches of max reach range. Somebody in a wheelchair would not be able to use this bottle filler at all. It's not accessible. We would need to install that bottle filler somewhere else as a standalone, or put a smaller bottle filler lower down above that low side unit. And then we have the Haas 1501 again, that white enamel. It's a very popular installation option for schools, as I talked about, because of that white enamel surface. And it's really just a great example of an accessible ADA setup. The bottle filler is well within our reach ranges. It comes on that low side with the mounting panel it's provided. And we use these as examples quite a bit throughout our presentations. The standalone, we have the bottle filler for that as well. You can add these as your third child height fountain, or as your standalone ADA fountain if you would like as well. Or even if you're meeting all the requirements you already have, these can be added after the fact as high side fountains, just depending on your facility's needs and making sure you meet those minimum requirements. If you did install that at a child's height, then we would need to remember that children are those 12 and under for the ADA. And therefore we have to use the reach range provided for those different age groups that Justin showed on the table earlier on. So if we're using the 9 to 12-year-old reach range, we would need it to be below 44 inches max. Our bottle filler here is at 42 and 5/8 inches, so we're below that. Our bubbler head spout is at 30 inches, so where the water is actually coming out of, that is compliant. And then our bubbler head is also less than 3.5 inches from that front end. This is a fully compliant example. We send this one out quite a bit. I suggest when we send the slides out after this presentation that you hold on to this slide in particular. And then as we finish up the examples here, this one is right here in our own backyard at the Reno airport, not too far from the Haas headquarters. And it's really just a great example to show ADA compliance for clear floor space, reach range, it's aesthetically pleasing. We have our bottle filler in the correct place. And we like to think that if we can teach this everywhere, we better make sure that it's right in our own backyard. So it's nice to see that we have something installed so perfectly just down the street from us. And with that, we'll get into poll question number 4, Allie.
Alrighty, getting into our second to last poll question of the presentation. What percentage of time do you specify a bottle filler when specifying a drinking fountain? If not applicable, please do not respond. The first option is 75% and over. The second option is 50 to 74%. The third option is 25 to 49%. The fourth option is 1 to 24%, and the last option is 0%. I'll give you all just a few more seconds to enter in your responses. Again, we super appreciate it. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll question. Back to you, Hayden.
I'm actually going to pass things over to Justin here. Justin, if you'd like to handle the hygienic and accessible hydration options for us. You got it.
I got it from here. So really quickly, I'm going to touch on a couple quick things. With the whole, theme of this webinar being accessibility, we want to make sure that you know what kind of options are out there. So some of the key benefits to, of course, adding hygienic and accessible options to your fountains and ensuring that they are hygienic and accessible in public is number one, including and ensuring sanitary activation, right? I mean, we just went through a pandemic. We had a pretty tough time there with germs in public, and adding options to these fountains, touchless, clean surfaces, enhanced surfaces, etc., can really help to improve that. Touchless electric sensors also for hands-free operation, making sure we're keeping our hands off the equipment, but still being able to really easily activate the equipment with a really simple front motion, approaching with your hand, activating the equipment and walking away, never having to touch it once, right? Quick installation with this type of equipment, easy to follow instructions and in-field installation. We're talking about retrofitting equipment with upgraded equipment to make it more hygienic and accessible. We try to make it as easy as possible, right? We want you to be able to get this equipment, update your equipment, and improve its overall receptiveness in public, right? And then antimicrobial surfaces, incredibly important for residual use against coronavirus and other viruses that might be on the surface, okay? Some of the ways that you might accomplish that are one, utilizing electric water coolers, bottle fillers. These are huge for us. We absolutely love these. We think they're really well designed from an aesthetic value as well, but they're ADA compliant. They have lots of smart features allowing for a Monday through Friday, Saturday through Sunday schedule for deactivation of the unit to extend the life, since it's an appliance really. You have touchless bottle fillers on it, chilled water, and they are incredibly easy to install and retrofit over places where previous manufacturers might have been if you're looking for an upgrade inside of your facility. Okay. Now in the center there, indoor, outdoor wall mounted bottle fillers. Bottle fillers are really just, you can't throw a stone and not hit a project that has a bottle filler on it now. 10 more, etc. years ago, bottle fillers were pretty uncommon, actually, or at least much less common. And now they're on every project, every building, everybody's got a bottle filler. So these are ADA compliant, they're durable, they're fully accessible, they're for indoor, outdoor use, and they're great for upgrading, which you already have in place. And then last, hands-free sensor retrofit kits. You can add sensors to your equipment, your Haas equipment, your Haas bottle fillers, etc., through a very easy process. You just need power somewhere near the fountain, and you can quickly retrofit them with touchless sensors, allowing completely touchless experience at your equipment and helping to lower the amount of germs that could be spread or viruses. And then lastly, upgrade your surfaces. Right? I don't know if you know this about copper, but it has a low surface stability for viruses on the surface of copper. The life of those viruses is greatly diminished as opposed to being on the surface of stainless steel or other materials. Copper just naturally reacts to those viruses and stuff on the surface and helps diminish them and keep you safe in public. So we have retrofit kits available for buttons, etc., to upgrade those, and I think they actually look pretty cool on the units, to be fair. Next, really cool. Whoa, what just happened? Hold on. It's kind of skipping around a little bit. Sorry about that. There we go. Back to where we are. Next slide. I'm like hitting the button, and it's like it got a mind of its own there for a second. New from us here at Haas is a retrofittable bottle stand accessory. This will help to make our equipment even more accessible, easy to use. There are 3 models available, the BTL 1001, BTL 1107, and BTL 1311. These provide a level, easily retrofittable, accessible platform to place your bottle while filling up, while using the 1920 bottle filler on our fountains. This allows for hands-free operation. If you're utilizing a wheelchair, etc., you have a free hand to fully place your bottle, operate the equipment, and get away. And if you're using prosthetic limbs, right, this will make the process even easier from start to finish of accessing the equipment and utilizing it from an accessibility and ADA standpoint, right? We need to go above and beyond. We need to make sure these are accessible, they're easy to use, and this will help a great deal. They look good on the fountains too, like they were installed at the factory. They have that OEM look. They are incredibly easy to install and only need a common installation tool. So they're tamper resistant, sturdy, non-intrusive for folks using the bubbler. If you're interested in learning more about them, just visit www.hosco.com, look for bottle stands in the search bar. And that brings us to poll question number 5. Then we're gonna hit the Q&A and close out.
Our final poll question of today is, would you be interested in learning more about the Haws Touchless Hydration products? Please select either yes, please have someone contact me, or no, thank you. I'll give you all just a little bit more time to fill out, to enter in your answers. Again, thank you for participating in all the poll questions. We greatly appreciate it. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and close this out. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for participating. Thanks for being a part of that. We really do appreciate it. It helps us out a lot. So on to the Q&A, and I'll just go ahead and kick it off. One of the question submissions we had was, do I have to have a bottle filler installed? And the answer is super simple. It's no. Unlike drinking fountains, bottle fillers are just optional. Bottle fillers were typically installed after construction as a user preference, but now we see bottle fillers being more spec-driven, specification-driven on projects than ever before. Like I said, you can't throw a stone without hitting a project that has a bottle filler on it. So much more common now, but they are fully optional. You do not have to have a bottle filler on site. Hayden, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, so our next question is, do the protrusion limits apply to indoor and outdoor placements for objects with a leading edge of more than 27 inches? So yes, if we have a high side fountain with a lower edge that's above that 27 inches, and if it's on an alcove, then a cane skirt would be needed in order to bring that lower edge down to 27 inches. And that does apply in indoor or outdoor. It's just wherever it's being installed.
And then the next one is, can you provide an example as to when we would design for a parallel approach versus a straightforward approach? And the easy answer is that it's most common for children's height wheelchairs. Again, their chairs can be kind of all over the place, not a standard size. Making sure access is easy for them is super important. It's obviously the parallel approach is really used when it best utilizes the clear space you're installing the unit in, or the local, and when adhering to the local standards. They have their own specific requirements. So make sure you're checking local codes to ensure that you are getting all of the information, because some areas require a parallel approach. Specifically for children's use, it's not an option. So make sure you're checking, but that's typically where you see parallel approaches, is for children's approach and use.
The fourth question we have is, for businesses that are not open to the public, are children's size fountains like bottle fillers optional? So they are entirely optional. Child height fountains are necessary when we have a facility that has a larger number of children being supervised by fewer adults, but they are also a good addition if you would like to just add them for extra benefit. So if you have a child care center at your facility, then that's probably an area where you would want to add a child height ADA fountain for the future.
All right, and then you said they fountains don't have to be in the same location. How far away is the max min on super distance? That was super easy. There isn't one. There really isn't a minimum maximum distance. You usually want a pair on each floor, and depending on how big those floors are, multiple, depending on the again, occupancy of that area. And they're usually just shoved next to the restrooms or break areas, etc. Sometimes they're in a little, more common area, in a hallway, etc., like that. But there's no bare minimum. But it's easier in the design for them to be next to each other, centrally located for everybody and things like that. But there's really no min-max that's stated.
Yeah, and then we have another really easy question here. Where can I get a copy of the ADA guidelines? You can get a copy of everything you need, including the ADA guidelines, right at ada.gov. It's on their website. You can find all the guidelines. They're very nicely and neatly laid out for you, and it's all free.
And are we required to make changes, adjustments to our water fountains that do not currently follow the ADA regulations? For example, if the bottom filter is on the high water fountain instead of the lower one, yeah, you got to make the changes. These requirements apply to all fountains in accessible areas. So long as you have granted access to that area, to that element in your facility, then yeah, it has to be fully accessible. There are reasonably places where you cannot grant access to inside of, you know, some facilities, and you don't have to make those accessible if the area is not accessible technically. You still have to follow your 50-50 rule, but place those fountains intelligently, accessibly, and make sure that the ones that are in accessible areas of your facility are fully meeting the ADA guidelines.
And our final Q&A submission for today is for exterior application. What are the standard procedures for winter months? Freeze protecting. Freeze protecting your equipment is always going to be the best way to get year-round access to water, whether it's in a park or another outdoor area. However, we do see many places that'll shut down their fountains during the winter months in order to prevent freezing. Those areas do tend to be less used during that time of the year because it's cold or snowing or whatever the elements are outside. But the ADA requirements, they don't give us a blatant instruction on the requirements for freeze protecting.
All right, and then just a quick reminder, that follow-up email, it's gonna go out 24 to 48 hours after the presentation. It'll include everything we just discussed, plus all the other questions that were submitted. The CEU instructions, please wait for the email. It will have the CEU instructions so that you can get those CEU credits, and we'll make sure to get that taken care of for you as quickly as we possibly can. And then in closing, our Haas customer service, seriously, top-notch customer service team in the walls here at Haas. That's their contact information right there. Please reach out to them if you have any questions or about products, services, etc. Our Haas technical support is also available. That's their number and email. They're very quick to respond, very helpful. We have a live chat function on haasco.com. If you have a quick question but you don't want to hop on the phone, hit the blue button on the screen on the website, and they'll quickly get back to you and you can respond at your leisure, okay? Visit www.haasco.com for additional resources. We have another webinar January 25th called Haas Hydration Products Overview. We're gonna go over a lot of our products, how they meet accessibility guidelines, how they can be used in your facility, a lot of their functions and things like that. So to get you updated on our product line, the offerings, how they can be used, and etc. That will be available January 25th, so look for our invitation. And in closing, thank you very much for being here. We greatly appreciate you. Please go forth and be advocates for accessibility and spread the knowledge that you have gained in this webinar. And again, thank you very much for being here.